September 26, 1820, and the Salernum lycopersicum, alias the wolf peach, alias the love apple, alias the Jerusalem apple, alias the tomato, alias the tomato, still has not been eaten anywhere in the United States. The sinister reputation of this poisonous, rich, round, red, pulpous mass, known to botanists and housewives as a flower and an ornamental shrub, but shunned, feared, and despised as an edible food, is still intact. For Colonel Robert Gibbon Johnson, the wealthiest man in Salem County and the first citizen of this southern New Jersey town, has not shown up, as he has promised, to eat a tomato right here on the step of Salem Courthouse before a highly excited but extremely skeptical crowd. The tomato or love apple or Jerusalem apple, as you prefer, has never been eaten in this country, and the crowd is certainly in a
September 26, 1820, Salem, New Jersey. You are there.
An early American, a citizen of New Jersey, has promised to eat a tomato regarded by science, tradition, and custom as poisonous. CBS takes you back 129 years to an amusing but significant moment in the unceasing struggle against ignorance and superstition. All things are as they were then, except for one thing. When CBS is there,
you are there.
You Are There, produced and directed by Robert Louis Cheon, is based on authentic historical fact and quotation. And now,
Salem, New Jersey, the Courthouse Square, and John Daly.
Promised to eat a tomato here on the single white marble step of the Salem Courthouse. Yesterday, when word of Colonel Johnson's intention reached CBS News in New York, we hurried down here to Salem to cover the event. For the tomato, as botanists and herbalists will tell you, is a poisonous flower which has never been eaten in the United States of America. According to botanists, if Colonel Johnson dares eat one, he will either drop dead on the spot or suffer a lingering death from a multitude of diseases. But if, on the other hand, Colonel Johnson shows no ill effects from the tomato, he will force the herbalists to reconsider their 3 centuries-old theories about the Salernum lycopersicum. At any rate, we're going to stay on the air here until something happens, one way or the other. And there goes the local fireman's band. Colonel Johnson is still in his house 1 block away down Market Street, and he has given us no indication as to when he's going to come out. Just who is this man who has caused all this excitement? Well, Quincy Howe has been talking to the townspeople. He's in the news headquarters set up inside the courthouse. So let's see what Quincy has found out. Go ahead, Quincy Howe.
According to his neighbors, Colonel Robert Gibbon Johnson is 49 years old. He was born and raised in Salem and belongs to one of the pioneer families of this community. Salem citizens also tell me that the colonel owns about half the town. He's a much-traveled man. As for Colonel Johnson and the love apple, here are the facts. 12 years ago, the colonel introduced the tomato to the farmers of Salem County, persuaded some of them to grow tomatoes in their gardens as ornamental shrubs. Then, as an added inducement, the colonel offered prizes each year at the Salem County Fair for the largest and most attractive tomatoes grown. But as far as I can learn, until yesterday, never did he say anything about eating one. Then, yesterday, at this year's county fair now in progress, Colonel Johnson announced, while making his annual awards, that he would eat one of the prize tomatoes right here on the courthouse step today at high noon. You can imagine the excitement that made. According to one Salem citizen, this is the biggest thing that's happened since a local character called Simon Sparks plowed up $7 Spanish on his farm last March. Colonel Johnson, they tell me, is rather hard to get at. We can believe that all right, because we've tried without success to interview him, and when he made his announcement, I understand no one presumed to try to talk him out of it. People figured, well, if Colonel Johnson wants to eat a tomato, let him. Nobody could stop him anyhow. The news spread fast, and it has brought farmers and tradesmen into Salem from miles around, even as far away as from Philadelphia, 38 miles away. The things people will do these days just to get attention. And now, back to John Daly outside this courthouse.
Well, the firemen's band, as you can hear, has decided to take a rest, and while they're holding off for a while, let's talk to Mr. F.L. McCullough, Secretary of the Salem County Agricultural Society.
Great honor.
Mr. McCullough is standing right here beside me. He's a man about 40, got a wide grin on his face, and he's holding a basket of love apples. And Mr. McCullough tells me that when the big moment comes, the Colonel is going to risk his life on one of the love apples in that basket.
That's right. They're prize apples, the finest love apples in Salem County. Colonel said so himself yesterday, right out at the fair.
Really?
Biggest surprise of my life when he told me mine were the pick of the crop. Look at them. Ain't they beauties? Huh?
Oh, they're very handsome, all right. But tell me, Mr. McCullough, Colonel Johnson is the president of the Salem County Agricultural Society, isn't he?
That's right. Colonel is president of everything around here. Big man, real booster. Peck of money, too.
And he's a good friend of yours, isn't he?
Yes, sir. Fine Christian man.
Well, how do you feel about the Colonel eating your poisonous love apples?
Oh, great honor. Great honor. I'm only secretary of the society. Colonel's the president.
Oh, but what I mean, Mr. McCullough, is, do you think the Colonel will drop dead right here on this courthouse step when he eats one of your love apples?
No, sir. I do not.
Well, I've talked to a lot of people in Salem since we arrived here this morning, Mr. McCullough, and yours seems to be somewhat of an unorthodox view. You're the first man to strike an optimistic note.
Well, I'll tell you. You see this love apple?
Yes?
There's enough poison in here to kill an ordinary man. But Colonel Johnson ain't no ordinary man. He's got the constitution of a horse. Take more than what this love apple has got to kill that man. You ever seen the Colonel?
No, I haven't, Mr. McCullough, but I'm certainly looking forward to it.
He's a big man, strong man. I saw him in the Whiskey Rebellion.
Well, now, what you're saying, then, is that the love apple is poisonous, but still not deadly enough to kill Colonel Johnson, right?
Of course, you understand I wouldn't advise anybody else to try eating one. It all depends on a man's constitution. Now, some people's constitutions ain't as strong as others. You'd take mine. I wouldn't think of eating one of those love apples. Yeah, but the Colonel, he's a big man. He knows what he's doing.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. McCullough, Secretary of the Salem County Agricultural Society.
Glad to oblige. Great honor.
Thank
Great
you.
honor.
Thank you very much, sir. There go the firemen again. The band has struck up, and maybe they're subtly suggesting to Colonel Johnson that he stop keeping this crowd waiting and come out here and eat that tomato. But while we're waiting, let's listen to their musical suggestion. The Colonel doesn't seem to be taking the suggestion very seriously. I don't see him coming up the street anyway. However, Ned Calmer is down there in front of his house on Market Street, just 1 block away, so let's find out what's holding him up. Go ahead, Ned Calmer.
I don't know just what's holding Colonel Johnson up, unless it could be that Sheriff Ed Smith is still trying to talk him out of going through with his proposal to eat that love apple. The sheriff went into the Colonel's house a little while ago, and I talked to him then. He said there was no law in this town against a man eating a tomato, but he did say that he thought it was his duty to try to talk the Colonel out of it. Most of the people here outside Colonel Johnson's house, like the people at the courthouse square, believe the Colonel will eat the tomato, that he'll come out in his own good time. But there's a man with me now who takes another view. He's Mr. Thomas Lamson. That's Lambson, a member of the Salem Town Council. Mr. Lamson, what's your view on the big question of the day?
Publicity, that's all it is, publicity.
Publicity?
Yes, Bob Johnson is going to eat that love apple. He's much too intelligent a man.
You think so?
Why, certainly. I went to Princeton with Bob. He knows better than to place his life in jeopardy.
Well, what do you mean by publicity, Councilman?
Why,
Publicity for what?
Oh, public office, of course. You see, Bob Johnson is preparing to run for the legislature next year. He's preparing to run against me.
Oh, is that it?
And that's right. He has all the land he wants, all the money he wants. He has everything but his name on the door of the State House, and that is what he wants.
But I don't quite understand, Councilman.
Why,
What's his running for office against you next year got to do with his eating a tomato today?
Oh, tomato. He's not going to eat any tomatoes. Everybody knows they're poisonous. No, seriously. He's going to talk.
Talk?
Of course, he schemed this whole thing up just to bring voters here from all over the county.
Now, about that love
forgive
apple,
me.
Mr.
When he gets out on that courthouse step, he's going to announce that he's a candidate. He's going to make a speech. And I'm going to be there to answer him. Now, my record in the city council is is clear.
Oh, yes?
Yes, it speaks for itself, but I don't know what Bob's politics are exactly. He's never told me how he voted. I do
Lampson, I'm
believe,
afraid I
however,
don't-
he's a Federalist because he's coming out against me and I'm a Democratic Republican.
You were going to tell
now,
us that-
everybody knows how I stood on the Missouri Compromise question early this year.
Well, how did you stand?
It stirred me very much. Understand, Salem County is below the Mason and Dixon line, and most of my constituents are slaveholders. This is a slaveholding community, and we do not like to see our particular kind of economy restricted anywhere in this great and growing country of ours.
I see what you mean.
I beg your pardon. Did you know, sir, that the cost of living in Salem County is fully 1/3 less than in larger cities not far distant?
Is that a fact?
Oh, it is.
Well, thank you very much,
It is our
Mr.
way of life that permits us that privilege. And I say again, we do not want to see that way of life interfered with.
Thank
now,
you
if
very-
Bob Johnson thinks he can swing the voters of Salem to a change of thinking on this all-important subject, he is very much
Thank
mistaken.
you very
And
much,
that is something
Councilman
that I
Thomas
believe
Lampson, for your
absolutely-
views on
Oh,
love
I
apples
beg your
and
pardon. I'm
politics.
sorry. Thank
There's
you, Mr.
still no
Thomas,
sign
very
of
much
Colonel
for the
Johnson
privilege.
coming
I
out of the
didn't
house.
intend to encroach
Mr.
upon
Lampson,
all
would you
your
step
time.
away from the
Now,
microphone,
where is
please?
that
But
gentleman?
as long as no official word is forthcoming telling us that the Colonel has abandoned his project, we'll stick right here. And now back to Courthouse Square and Ken Roberts in the grandstand.
Up here in the grandstand, opposite John Daly, in front of the courthouse, we've been very fortunate in getting one of the distinguished ladies of Salem to talk to us. I'd like to introduce Mrs. Annie Hunter, president of the Ladies' Aid Society of St. John's Episcopal Church. It's very good of you, Mrs. Hunter, to speak with us. We do appreciate it. How are you bearing up under the strain of waiting for Colonel Johnson to appear?
Oh, it's no strain at all. I'm having a marvelous time. You can depend upon Colonel Johnson to keep Salem entertained. He's quite a character, you know.
Really?
Oh, yes. During the Revolution, when he was only 7 years old, he began his extraordinary career by slapping a British officer. Only 7, mind you, a baby.
Heck of that.
Yes, and then when he marched in the Whiskey Rebellion, he became a good friend of the late President Washington. He admired him so much that he affected the president's manner of dress. He wore his hair in a short queue, the way Washington did, you know, and lace ruffles on his coat and sleeves.
Yes.
And today, even though all that is out of style, and despite the fact that everybody laughs at him, the colonel still goes around dressed like George Washington. Most amusing man. Very eccentric.
So it seems.
Why, only last year, in the latest of his escapades before this one, he left our church in a huff because his friend, the Reverend Ashbel Green, was accidentally locked out.
The Reverend Ashbel Green, president of Princeton College?
The very same. It made the colonel so mad he joined the Presbyterians.
No.
Yes. He gave them the land next to his mansion and helped build a church of their own with a steeple higher than ours. Oh, I tell you, the man is incredible. There's simply no telling what he'll do next.
Well, do you think he'll eat a love apple here today?
Oh, mercy, no. The colonel may be fantastic, but I assure you he's much too much in love with life to take his own.
Well, if he's not going to eat a love apple, what is he going to do?
Oh, that's what I'm waiting to find out. But whatever it is, it'll be gay. You can trust the colonel for that.
Mrs. Hunter, in some communities, it's considered proper for a young lady to wear a sachet of dried tomato seeds around her neck. Is that true here in Salem, too?
Oh, yes. If it doesn't invite courtship and marriage, it should at least make the young lady popular with the men. Why, I remember when I was a little girl, I learned in school that Sir Walter Raleigh gave the first love apple to Queen Elizabeth.
Now, I ask, did you wear such a sachet when you were a girl?
Bless you, yes. And I had many suitors. All of them brought me love apples. My husband brought me the most beautiful one of all. That's my husband there. You met him, I think, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Annie Hunter.
Oh, not at all. Delighted, I'm sure.
Mrs. Hunter is going back to her seat. The crowd seems to be getting more and more impatient. It's long past the time when Colonel Johnson promised to appear to eat the tomato. More and more eyes keep turning toward the Johnson Mansion down on Market Street. And once again, as if to keep the crowd entertained, the fireman's band sounds off. But while they try to hold the interest of these waiting spectators, let's go inside the courthouse to Quincy Howe again. Go ahead, Quincy.
We've managed to find two very interesting people who disagree with each other on what's going to happen to Colonel Johnson if he eats a tomato. First, I'd like you to meet Colonel Johnson's personal physician, Dr. James Van Meter. Doctor, has Colonel Johnson consulted you about his plan to eat the love apple here today?
No, I couldn't say that. Reversing the usual relationship between doctor and patient, I consulted Colonel Johnson. If I may be permitted a simile, I would say Muhammad wouldn't come to the mountain, so the mountain went to Muhammad.
Yes, and to continue your simile, Dr. Van Meter, what did Muhammad say?
Well, the colonel told me that he really meant to come out here and indulge himself in the rather foolish exhibition he announced.
Why do you consider it foolish, Doctor?
Perhaps it would help you to understand, Mr. Howe, if I elaborated a bit on the background of the Salernum lycopersicum.
Oh, yes, I'm sure it would. Please do, Dr. Van Meter.
The Salernum lycopersicum is a large, rough-skinned, misshapen growth, coarse, hairy, scraggly, ill-smelling, pleasing only when its fruits glow amongst the dull green leaves, purely as an ornament, you understand. It yields no nourishment, of course, to the body. Herbalists recognize its close relationship to the deadly nightshade and other rankly poisonous herbs, such as the mushroom.
Well, that's interesting, Dr. Van Meter. Now, in the light of this very excellent information you've given us, can you tell us exactly what effects Colonel Johnson may suffer if he eats a tomato today?
Well, it's difficult to predict exactly the physical disabilities which are likely to result. It all depends on the manner in which the colonel's system reacts to the ingestion of certain foods. It is possible that he will foam and froth at the mouth and fall dead on the spot. The Salernum lycopersicum, contains oxalic acid, which, if taken in large concentrated doses, will cause instant death.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yes. Or the colonel may be stricken immediately with appendicitis. Then he suffers from high blood pressure, and the juice of the tomato will undoubtedly aggravate this condition. Or if the tomato is overripe, if it's been warmed by the sun, it may expose him to the danger of brain fever. If he should survive all these afflictions, it's possible that the skin of the love apple may stick to the lining of his stomach and eventually cause cancer.
Oh, well, now, wait a minute, Dr. Van Meter. Does medical science have proof that eating a tomato causes cancer?
Oh, Mr. Howe, does medical science have proof that eating a tomato does not cause cancer?
Well, apparently not. I guess I see what you mean. I think not.
Of course not. As long as the negative is not proven, the positive may reasonably be inferred. Is that not so, Mr. Howe?
Yes, I suppose that is a fair assumption.
Yes.
Now, I would infer, rather, that you told all this to Colonel Johnson. Is that true, Dr. Van Meter?
As his physician, I considered it my duty to give him the benefit of my professional advice. Now that he's had the benefit of my scientific knowledge, I'm confident that reason will prevail. I assure you, sir, Colonel Johnson will not eat a tomato today nor any day.
Thank you very much, Dr. Van Meter, for giving us the current scientific thinking on the tomato.
Not at all.
Now, the man I'm going to introduce next disagrees with you. He is Mr. Michele Felice Cornet. That's right, is it? Italian name. A resident of Salem, Massachusetts, which, oddly enough, has the same name as Salem, New Jersey.
Exactly the same.
Mr. Cornet, you heard what Dr. Van Meter has said. What do you think about it?
Oh, Dr. Van Meter, he's very good, educated man. I like to hear him talk. But sometimes experience is a better teacher than a book.
Yeah, that's it.
Now, I know from experience about the tomato. I eat it.
When, Mr. Cornet, when did you eat a tomato?
All my life. I eat much macaroni, much oil, and much tomato. My grandfather ate tomato. He died when he 100. My father ate tomato. He died when he 103.
Young man.
Young man. And I eat a tomato, and I'm a live forever.
That's fine. More power to you.
Yeah. Well, I grow tomato in Salem, Massachusetts for 20 years. And I try to make the people eat it. They call me the tomato missionary. Tomato missionary. They call me crazy, too. But they won't eat it.
Won't eat?
No, they won't eat a tomato. Well, when I hear that Colonel Johnson try to do the same thing I try to do, I come to wish for him buona fortuna. That's a good luck. So I come down to see if he have better luck than I have.
Well, you think then, Mr. Cornet, that Colonel Johnson will eat a tomato and will not, suffer any ill effects?
Oh, ill effects? Oh, yeah, sicuro. It will not kill him. It will make him live longer.
Oh, now, wait a minute. You realize, of course, Mr. Cornet, that what you believe is different than what scientists all over the world believe.
Oh, see, I am not a scientist. I only a man. I know only what is good for me, and I eat it.
If I may, Mr. Howe.
Yes, of course, Dr. Van Meter.
I'd like to ask Mr. Cornet a few questions. Mr. Cornet, you're not an American. You weren't born in the States, were you, Mr. Cornet?
Sure, I am American. I not born here.
That's what I mean. Where were you born?
In Napoli, Italy. I am Neapolitan. I fight in the Neapolitan army against Napoleon. And I tell you about that. The day when we fight, we were all very good dressed and much very fine in our uniform. So fancy uniform. The music of the band. And when we come up, we shoot at the Frenchman.
Yes,
but when one Frenchman is fall, another step in his place. And still we shoot. And by, the French shoot all together like one big cannon. And then we run. They're back. I run 3 miles. 3 miles.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
Mr. Cornet, what do you do for a living, I mean?
I am artist. I pen pictures of ships and ocean and people by the ocean.
You're
and,
a painter.
Painter.
And, of course, as you said, you never went to school.
No, I never go to school.
And, how old are you, may I ask?
I stubbornly, 10 years ago. I am 60 and 10 years. The insurance company selling me a policy for $1,570. And they promised to pay me $100 every 6 months for the rest of my life. They think I don't last long. So they still pay me. The president, he said he's very glad I am so well. But I know he lie all the time. He don't know how much tomato I eat.
Yes, thank you. For a man your age, Mr. Cornet, who never had any education, you have a fantastic imagination.
Oh, you're nice, too.
You tell an excellent story.
Oh, I like it to tell stories.
Yes, you must tell us some more sometime.
Sure, I'm glad to.
Just a minute, gentlemen. Just a moment. John Daly informs me that Colonel Johnson has come out of his house and is on his way to the courthouse square. So over to John Daly. Go ahead, John.
Colonel Johnson is only a few feet away now, coming up to the courthouse steps. Spectators making way for him, and the band has strung up again. The firemen musicians are giving the colonel a rousing welcome. The colonel is wearing his usual black suit with white ruffles. He wears a stovepipe hat, and also he's carrying a cane. And he's up here on the courthouse step now. The crowd seems, for the most part, respectful in the presence of the town's most important citizen. They know the big moment has arrived, and they're beside themselves with anticipation. The colonel is acknowledging the greetings of the crowd. They move around him, try to shake his hand. Now the band has stopped playing. The colonel smiles at the fireman, removes his hat, and now he's given his hat to Sheriff Smith. The colonel holds up his hand. The crowd is falling silent quickly, so let's listen to Colonel Johnson.
Friends and citizens of Salem County, I am glad to see so many of you here today. And I know that you are delighted to see me.
Indeed we are.
Now, it has come to my attention that certain elements in this town have charged that I have conspired to cause you to congregate here for my own person. I am going to run for the legislature on the Federalist ticket, and I want you all to vote for me in the next election.
When are you going to eat that tomato, Colonel?
I'm glad you brought that up, Bill. Speaking of tomatoes, let me tell you something about the love apple. Did you know that many centuries ago the tomato was used as a food by the Egyptians and the Greeks? Indeed it was. And then it was swallowed up in the annals of antiquity. But it turned up again in Peru and Mexico. You just couldn't stop that old tomato. No, sir. Cortez and Pizarro took it back to Spain. Spain took it to Italy. Italy took it to France. France took it to England. England took it to Norway, Sweden, Germany. And I brought it to Salem.
Yes, but when are you going to eat it?
William, I want you to hear this. Just as sure as my name is Colonel Robert Gibbon Johnson, give me one of those apples, Mr. McCullough.
Oh, yes, Colonel.
I'm still talking to you, Bill. I predict that the time is coming when this golden red...
Colonel Johnson has reached into Mr. McCullough's basket and picked up a love apple.
Light to the eye, a joy to the palate, whether fried, baked, boiled, or even eaten raw, will form the foundation of a great garden industry. It will be recognized, eaten and enjoyed as an edible food. Mark my word, it will. And to help that day, that enlightened day, to help dispel the tall tales, the fantastic fables that you've been hearing about the tomato, to show you, in short, that it's not poisonous, that it will not strike you dead, that it's good to eat, good for the mind as well as the body. I'm going to eat one right now.
Colonel Johnson has raised the love apple to his lips. He's bitten into it. He's eating it with evident relish. He's taken another bite. The crowd is open-mouthed with astonishment. They can't believe their eyes. They're waiting for the poison of the deadly tomato to take effect to strike Colonel Johnson dead on the spot. But the colonel is still very much alive. He's taken another love apple out of Mr. McCullough's basket. He's bitten into that one. He's holding both tomatoes up to the crowd, one in his left hand, the other in his right. He's turning completely around now, both arms raised high in the air to show the crowd. Again, he's biting into the love apples. First one, then the other. He's still on his feet. He's still fighting. And then the crowd has shouted out, he's done it. Others are shouting out, and the crowd is breaking into cheers. Cheers for Colonel Johnson. And there's the fireman's band. And Colonel Johnson still goes on eating those tomatoes, biting into them with great satisfaction and relish. And the thing which nobody thought was possible has come to pass right here before our eyes. Today in this little town of
September 26, 1820, Colonel Johnson proves that the tomato is not poisonous, and the fight against ignorance and superstition goes on.
You have been listening to Colonel Johnson Eats the Love Apple, another broadcast in the series You Are There, produced and directed by Robert Louis Cheon. Colonel Johnson Eats the Love Apple was written by Macajah Wren and Mr. Cheon. A.J. Herbert played Colonel Johnson, John Gibson was Mr. McCullough, Raymond Edward Johnson played Councilman Lamson, Ara Gerald was Mrs. Hunter, Bernard Lenrow was Dr. Van Meter, Carl Swenson played Mr. Corney, and the cast included Guy Sorrell, Jim Davidson, and others. Joseph S. Sickler, official historian for Salem County, New Jersey, was consultant for this broadcast. Next week,
August 4th, 1734, New York City. The trial of John Peter Zenger. You are there.
CBS brings you two outstanding stars tonight and every Sunday when Miss Helen Hayes is heard on the Electric Theater and Miss Eve Arden assumes the title role in the comedy Our Miss Brooks. Tonight on the Electric Theater, Miss Hayes will star in an adaptation of the famous short story The Enemy. On Our Miss Brooks, Eve Arden, as America's most charming schoolmistress, will continue her capricious career in the hallowed halls of learning. These two CBS programs, starring Miss Helen Hayes and Miss Eve Arden, come to you over most of these same CBS network stations. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.